stopped, searched without reason, and left feeling humiliated. But everything shifted when her husband showed up. Regina Tales adjusted the rearview mirror of her silver sedan as the hum of the highway gave way to the quieter streets of suburban Dallas. The evening air was heavy, and her sequined gown glinted softly under the dim streetlights. She had just left a fundraiser for a local community center she was passionate about. Proud of the efforts being made, Regina was most eager to get back home to her family. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was her husband, John Tales, the newly appointed police commissioner of Dallas County. A soft smile crossed her face as she murmured, "Be home soon," choosing not to answer the call immediately. Then, a flash of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A police cruiser was approaching. Her brows furrowed as she slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. Her mind raced. She hadn't been speeding, run any stop signs, or been distracted on her phone. It must be a routine stop, she thought, rolling down her window as the officer drew near. The officer, a tall man with a stern look, didn't waste any time. "License and registration," he said curtly. Regina handed over her documents without hesitation. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" she inquired politely. The man glanced briefly at her license, then fixed her with a clipped tone. "We received a call about a vehicle matching this description involved in suspicious activity in the area." Regina's heart skipped a beat. "Suspicious activity," she repeated, her voice steady despite the growing unease. "Step out of the car, ma'am," the officer commanded, disregarding her question. She hesitated. "Excuse me, I'm not sure I understand," she said softly. "Step out of the car now," he interrupted, his tone firm. Suddenly, another cruiser pulled up behind the first, and two additional officers emerged, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. Regina's hand trembled as she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. Following the protocol her husband had taught her, she kept her hands visible. "I'm complying," she said calmly yet firmly. "But I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her composed tone seemed only to further irritate the officers. One of them began searching her car without asking permission, rifling through the back seat and trunk, while the other two hovered nearby, scrutinizing her every move. Regina's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't right. She had nothing to hide. Yet they treated her as if she were guilty of some wrongdoing, and it was deeply humiliating. But Regina wasn't the kind of woman to cower. "I'd like to call my husband," she stated, her voice cutting through the tension. One officer scoffed. "You can do that after we're done here." Regina's jaw tightened, yet she said nothing further. She wasn't about to escalate the situation. Instead, she silently prayed that someone would step in, that this ordeal would end before it spiraled any further. Little did she know the situation was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. Standing by her car, with the cool night air brushing against her arms, Regina watched as the officers continued to rummage through her belongings. Her impeccably organized trunk, packed with boxes of brochures and event materials from the fundraiser, was being treated like a crime scene. The officers were pulling items out, examining each one, as if they were searching for evidence of something sinister. One officer even held up a stack of pamphlets for inspection. "What's all this for?" Regina asked, her tone calm yet resolute. "I just came from a fundraiser. Those are brochures for the community center we're supporting." The officer looked at her with a blank expression before nonchalantly tossing the pamphlets back into the trunk. Without a word, a second officer, a younger man full of nervous energy, stepped forward. "Ma'am, are there any weapons, drugs, or illegal items in this vehicle?" "No, officer," Regina replied calmly, though her patience was wearing thin. "I've done nothing wrong. I'd like to know why I'm being treated this way." Her composed manner seemed to irritate them even more. "We're just doing our job," The older officer snapped, slamming the trunk shut. Regina glanced at her phone, buzzing on the passenger seat with another call from John. "May I get my phone to call my husband now?" she asked. The officers exchanged wary glances. "No sudden movements," one warned, as if she were a threat. Regina resisted the urge to roll her eyes, but complied, carefully reaching into her car to grab her phone. They seemed almost disappointed when her behavior didn't justify their suspicions, but they weren't done yet. "We're running your plates and license," one said, as he stepped away. Regina folded her arms and watched as the spotlight from a second cruiser swept over her car. The invasive scrutiny, baseless assumptions, and complete disregard for her dignity were infuriating. Yet she maintained her composure, knowing any sign of frustration could be used against her. With steady fingers, she dialed John's number. He answered almost immediately. "Regina, are you okay?" "I've been calling." She cut him off. "John, I'm being pulled over by the police. They're searching my car without cause. I need you here now." His tone shifted, filled with concern and authority. "Where are you?" he demanded. "I'm at her location," she replied, her voice faltering slightly as the gravity of the situation hit her. "Please hurry!" As she ended the call, she noticed the officers watching her intently, their postures stiffening. They didn't know who she had just called, but her unwavering confidence seemed to unsettle them. Minutes dragged by, each one feeling longer than the last. Regina stood silently, head held high despite the humiliation, while several passing cars slowed down with curious onlookers, craning their necks to see what was happening. Then she heard the sound of a car pulling up. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop nearby, and its driver's door opened. John stepped out, his tall frame exuding authority, and his face set in a mask of controlled anger. But what happened next was something neither Regina nor the officers could have anticipated. John Tales was not a man who lost his temper easily. Years of public service and his current role as police commissioner had taught him the importance of keeping control even in the most heated situations. Yet tonight, seeing his wife standing on the side of the road, surrounded by officers, her defiant expression barely concealing her unease, ignited a fierce determination within him. He stepped out of the SUV and slammed the door shut with decisive force, the sound cutting through the tense air. The officers exchanged guarded glances, surprised by his confident stride. John was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his police badge glinting from his belt under the streetlights. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "I'm John Tales, Dallas County Police Commissioner. Can someone explain to me why my wife is being detained and her vehicle searched without cause?" The senior officer, clearly in charge, straightened his posture but avoided meeting John's eyes. "Sir, we're conducting an investigation. We received a report of suspicious activity involving a vehicle matching this description." John's jaw tightened at the remark. Suspicious activity in a sedan, driven by a well-dressed woman coming from a charity event. You do realize you're speaking to Regina Tales, my wife, no less. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, casting a quick glance at his partner. The older officer cleared his throat. "We weren't aware of her identity, sir." "We were just following protocol," the officer responded. "Protocol?" John repeated, his voice rising. "Since when does protocol allow you to search someone's car without their consent or probable cause? Did she authorize this search?" Silence ensued. "That's what I thought," John said, stepping closer with a commanding presence. The tension among the officers was palpable as bystanders began to gather, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scene. The flashing red and blue lights cast an eerie glow over the scene. Regina finally spoke, her voice steady. John, they wouldn't even let me make a phone call at first. They've been treating me like a suspect from the moment I was pulled over. John turned to her, his expression softening briefly before hardening once more as he faced the officers. Do you have any idea what kind of liability you're exposing this department to? He demanded. You're harassing an innocent citizen, my wife, without justification. This isn't just unprofessional, it's unacceptable. One officer, clearly under pressure, stammered, We were just doing our job, sir. We didn't mean to. You didn't mean it, John cut him off sharply. Your actions say otherwise. And those cameras, he added, gesturing toward the growing number of onlookers recording the scene. Recording this will ensure there's no spin later. You're going to explain yourselves right here, right now. The officers exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed. The older officer stepped forward in an attempt to regain control. Commissioner Tales will need to de-escalate this situation. Perhaps we can discuss this back at the precinct. John let out a short, humorless laugh. De-escalate? You want to de-escalate now? After you've humiliated my wife and violated her rights? No. We're addressing this right here in public, exactly where you created this mess. By now the crowd had grown noticeably larger. People murmured in disbelief as Regina stood quietly, her posture composed, but her eyes betraying exhaustion. Call your supervisor, John ordered. Now, he added. The older officer hesitated, then reluctantly reached for his radio. The air was thick with tension and the weight of accountability as the officers awaited their superior's arrival. What happened next would push this already fraught situation to a breaking point. A faint crackle over the radio broke the silence as the older officer summoned his supervisor. The ensuing minutes felt like hours, with John standing his ground, Regina silently watching, and the crowd swelling. Some bystanders whispered among themselves while others live-streamed the event. Finally, a black and white SUV pulled up, and Lieutenant Charles Donovan stepped out. His crisp uniform and a look of both annoyance and confusion marked his approach. What's going on here? Donovan demanded, scanning the scene. He barely glanced at Regina before turning his attention to John. Lieutenant Donovan, John said evenly, your officers pulled over my wife, Regina Tales, and conducted an unwarranted search of her vehicle without providing any legitimate reason for their actions. I'm waiting for an explanation. Donovan's eyes widened as he registered the situation. I didn't realize that was the issue, John continued, his voice steady but sharp. It shouldn't matter who she is. Every citizen deserves respect and fair treatment. And this is anything but acceptable. The lieutenant's face tightened as he turned to address the officers. Is this true? Did you search her vehicle without cause? The older officer stuttered. We received a report about suspicious activity. Cut the excuses, John interjected sharply, his voice slicing through the air like a knife. You had no cause, none whatsoever. And now, not only have you harassed an innocent woman, you've thrown this entire department under scrutiny. Do you even understand the gravity of your actions? Donovan massaged his temple, clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. Commissioner, I promise this will be thoroughly investigated. I'll take care of it personally, he assured. Stepping forward with determination, John asserted, this isn't just about an investigation. It's about accountability. You can't just brush this under the carpet, not this time. The crowd murmured in agreement, their phones capturing every moment. Addressing the onlookers, he raised his voice. To everyone here, this is the kind of behavior we've been fighting to eradicate in our police force. No one, regardless of their status, job, or skin color, should have to endure this treatment. This is why accountability is crucial. A wave of applause spread through the crowd as Regina watched her husband, pride flickering in her eyes despite her exhaustion. Donovan, looking increasingly uneasy, suggested, "Commissioner, perhaps we can continue this conversation in private." "No," John replied firmly. "Transparency happens here in front of the people we serve. Your officers need to understand that their actions have consequences. If they don't, nothing will ever change." The officers shifted uncomfortably as Donovan struggled to respond. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted. There was no escaping the repercussions of their actions. But the story didn't end there. The fallout from that night would trigger a chain of events no one, especially not the officers involved, could have predicted. By the next morning, video recordings of the confrontation had gone viral, shared across social media with hashtags like Justice for Regina and Accountability Matters. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting the footage alongside headlines that questioned the integrity of the Dallas County Police Department. Regina and John sat side by side at their dining table as the morning light streamed through the windows. Still tired from the previous night, Regina sipped her coffee, while John scrolled through his phone, reading articles and comments. "They're calling it the Tails incident," John said in a heavy tone. "I knew it would attract attention, but it's bigger than I expected." Regina set her cup down and met his gaze. "It's not about us, John. It's about what this represents. How many people suffer this kind of treatment every day without a platform to speak out? They deserve justice, too." John nodded somberly. "I've dedicated my career to rooting out this behavior, and now it's clear there's much more to be done." Later that day, an emergency press conference was held. Standing at the podium, flanked by Regina and other department leaders, John's voice was calm, yet resolute, as he addressed a crowd of reporters and community members. "What happened last night was unacceptable," he began. He continued, "The actions of these officers were not merely a violation of policy. They were a betrayal of the trust this community places in its police force. Let me be clear, this is not who we are, and it is not who we will be." Pausing to let his words resonate, he added, "There will be a full and transparent investigation into this incident, and the officers involved have been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. But this isn't just about disciplinary action," he emphasized. "It's about systemic change. We must ask ourselves why incidents like this persist, and what we, as leaders and as a society, will do to end them." The crowd burst into applause, yet John's expression stayed grave. He then turned to Regina, who stepped forward to recount her ordeal. "When I was pulled over last night," Regina began steadily, "I felt utterly powerless. I followed every instruction perfectly. I did everything by the book. But it made no difference. I wasn't treated like a human being. Instead, I was regarded as a problem that needed to be managed. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way." She paused to take a deep breath before continuing. "But I also believe that transformation is achievable. It starts with accountability, with individuals brave enough to speak out, and with leaders, like my husband, who are committed to reforming the system from within. We must strive to do better for everyone." In the days that followed, the department introduced new training programs centered on de-escalation techniques and addressing implicit bias. They also formed a citizens' advisory board to ensure transparency and accountability. John personally reached out to community leaders, pledging to rebuild trust and implement the much-needed changes. The officers involved in the incident faced disciplinary actions, and one even resigned. Their conduct highlighted the deep-rooted systemic issues and the urgent need to address them directly. As for Regina, she became a fervent advocate for justice, using her voice to amplify those who had been silenced. She frequently shared her story not with anger, but with hope. "It's not just about what happened to me," she would say. "It's about what we do to ensure it never happens to anyone else." Ultimately, the Tales family turned a moment of injustice into a powerful catalyst for change. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead was long, but they faced it together with courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world. And that's the lesson we must all embrace. Real change begins with accountability and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. So ask yourself, what can you do to make a difference? Start today. Speak up. Push for change, because every voice matters.